Keenan Wright slumped into his usual seat near the middle of the city bus, adjusting the strap of his backpack as he pulled out his phone. It had been a long day at school, and all he wanted was to drown out the world with music. The familiar scent of damp fabric and cheap cologne clung to the air, mixing with the occasional whiff of fast food from passengers who had grabbed something on the way home. A group of kids from a different high school laughed loudly in the back, their voices bouncing off the scratched-up windows. At the front, a man in a construction vest tapped his knee to a silent beat, lost in his own world. The bus creaked forward, merging into traffic. Just another ordinary ride home, until it wasn't. A woman sat a few rows ahead of Keenan, stiff and rigid, clutching her leather purse like it might be snatched away at any second. Her name, Dorothy Lancaster, was embossed in gold on the bag. She looked around with pursed lips, her disapproving gaze scanning the bus like she was evaluating every passenger. "I don't know what this city is turning into," she muttered, not quite talking to anyone but loud enough for people to hear. Keenan's eyes flicked up. He had seen that look before, the tight-lipped expression of someone who thought certain people didn't belong. He sighed, turning back to his phone. Not today. He wasn't about to let some bitter old woman ruin his ride home. But the thing about people like her, they never stop at one comment. The bus rolled through the city streets, the hum of the engine blending with the chatter of passengers. Keenan kept his headphones in, though he wasn't playing any music. He had learned over the years that sometimes it was best to pretend not to hear ignorance. Dorothy Lancaster, however, wasn't the type to let things go. She shifted in her seat, her sharp eyes darting toward Keenan. She pursed her lips, then exhaled heavily, as if she were making a tough decision. Finally, she turned around. "You people," she muttered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Always taking up space, always acting like you belong here." Keenan lifted an eyebrow, his grip tightening on his phone. He wasn't in the mood for this. The bus was packed with people of different backgrounds, but he knew exactly who she was talking about. An older man sitting across the aisle glanced up from his newspaper, frowning. A woman near the front shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Keenan removed one earbud and looked at Dorothy. "Excuse me?" Dorothy scoffed. "You heard me, boy. You should be grateful you're even allowed here. Back in my day, things were different. We didn't have to deal with—" Her voice trailed off, but the damage was done. A few gasps came from nearby passengers. Someone whispered, "Is she serious?" Keenan felt heat rise in his chest. He had dealt with subtle racism before. People crossing the street when they saw him coming, cashiers watching him like a hawk in stores. But this was blatant. He exhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. "So what exactly are you trying to say?" Dorothy smirked, then said the words that made the entire bus freeze. "Why don't you just go back to Africa?" Silence fell over the bus. Eyes widened. A mother covered her child's ears. The bus driver's knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. Everyone waited for Keenan's response, and when he finally spoke, no one saw it coming. The bus remained silent, as if the air had been sucked out of it. Eyes darted between Keenan and Dorothy, passengers unsure of what would happen next. Some expected him to lash out, others thought he might ignore it. But Keenan had other plans. He leaned back in his seat, took a deep breath, and smiled. A calm, confident smile that made Dorothy's smirk falter just a little. Then he spoke, his voice steady, his tone controlled. "You want me to go back to Africa?" he repeated, his voice carrying through the bus. "That's interesting. Tell me, ma'am, where are you from?" Dorothy scoffed. "I was born right here in America." Keenan nodded. "And your ancestors? Were they always here?" Dorothy's face twitched. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Well," Keenan continued, "unless you're Native American, your family came from somewhere else too. Maybe England, Ireland, Germany?" He shrugged. "So technically, should we all go back to where we came from?" A few passengers chuckled, and Dorothy's face reddened. "That's different," she snapped. "How?" Keenan asked, tilting his head. "Because my ancestors were brought here against their will? Because they were enslaved, forced to build this country for free? Or is it different because you think your presence is more valid than mine?" More murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dorothy's lips pressed into a thin line, her confidence slipping. Keenan's voice softened, but his words hit even harder. I love my heritage. I'm proud of where I come from, but I'm also proud to be an American. You don't get to tell me where I belong. Someone clapped, then another, and another. The sound grew, filling the bus until nearly everyone was applauding. Dorothy sat frozen, humiliated. She had expected anger. She had expected a reaction that would make Keenan look bad. But what she got was something else entirely. Keenan turned back to his seat, putting his earbud in, but before he did, he added one last thing. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Dorothy had no response, but this was far from over. The bus continued its journey, but the tension still lingered. Dorothy sat stiffly in her seat, her face pale with embarrassment. She had expected Keenan to react with anger, maybe even aggression. Instead, he had flipped the entire situation on her, making her look like the fool. Keenan, on the other hand, remained composed. He knew he had won this exchange, but he wasn't interested in humiliating anyone, just making a point. His words had sparked something, not just in Dorothy, but in everyone on that bus. A middle-aged woman sitting across from him leaned in. That was incredible, she whispered. I don't think I've ever heard someone shut down ignorance so perfectly. Keenan shrugged. I just said the truth. From the back of the bus, a man in a business suit spoke up. Young man, that was powerful. The way you handled that. Respect. A teenage girl, likely in high school like Keenan, pulled out her phone. I recorded everything, she said. That was legendary. Keenan's stomach tightened. He hadn't thought about the possibility of going viral. He wasn't trying to be some social media sensation. He had just wanted to stand up for himself. But now, it seemed like his words were going to spread far beyond this bus ride. Dorothy noticed the girl filming and panicked. You can't post that. You need my permission, she barked. The girl raised an eyebrow. Public setting. First Amendment, she said casually. Besides, maybe this will teach you to think before you speak. A few passengers chuckled again. Dorothy's fists clenched in frustration, but she couldn't argue with the logic. Keenan turned back toward the window, exhaling slowly. He hadn't expected his day to take this turn, but something told him this was just the beginning, because the world was about to hear his words. And Dorothy was about to face consequences she never saw coming. By the time Keenan got home that evening, his phone was already buzzing nonstop. The girl from the bus had posted the video online, and within hours, it had spread like wildfire. Keenan, have you seen this? His best friend Malik sent him a link. Keenan hesitated before clicking. As the video played, he heard his own voice, calm and strong, shutting down Dorothy's hateful remark. The comments underneath were overwhelming. This kid is brilliant. The way he handled that was perfect. I'm tired of ignorant people like her. He schooled her without even raising his voice. Someone find this young man. I want to shake his hand. The likes and shares were climbing by the second. Celebrities, activists, and even teachers were reposting it, praising Keenan for his maturity and wisdom. The hashtag #StayEducated was trending, and Keenan's name was everywhere. At dinner, his mom, Angela, gave him a knowing look. So anything interesting happened today? She asked, sliding her phone toward him. She had seen the video. Keenan sighed. It just kind of happened, Mom. I wasn't trying to go viral. She smiled warmly. You weren't trying, but sometimes the truth finds a way to be heard. I'm proud of you. Just then his phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, he answered. Hello? A deep voice responded. Keenan, this is Mr. Hendricks, the principal of your school. We need to talk about the video. Keenan's stomach dropped. Was he in trouble, or was this something bigger than he ever imagined? Keenan sat frozen as he held the phone to his ear. His principal, Mr. Hendricks, had never called him before. Yes, sir? Keenan finally said. I saw the video, Keenan, Mr. Hendricks continued. His voice was calm but serious. It's causing a lot of discussion. I need you to come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. Keenan swallowed hard. Am I in trouble? Mr. Hendricks sighed. Not at all, but we need to address this situation properly. See you tomorrow. The call ended, leaving Keenan with 100 unanswered questions. The next morning, as he walked into school, students stared at him, whispering. Some gave him nods of approval, a few even clapped as he passed. His classmates had clearly seen the video. When Keenan reached the principal's office, Mr. Hendricks motioned for him to sit. Keenan, I want you to know that you handled yourself incredibly well. The principal said. Your response was intelligent and composed. I couldn't be prouder. Keenan let out a small breath of relief. Thank you, sir. But, Mr. Hendricks continued, this situation is bigger than just you and Dorothy. The school board has been made aware of the video, and some parents are concerned. Concerned? Keenan asked. Some feel this incident makes the school look bad. Others think we should have prevented it. Keenan frowned. But I didn't do anything wrong. I know, Mr. Hendricks assured him. That's why I'm calling an assembly this afternoon. I want you to speak. Keenan's eyes widened. You want me to speak? Yes, Mr. Hendricks nodded. This is an opportunity for an important conversation. I believe you can help lead it. Keenan's heart pounded. He had never spoken in front of the whole school before. Could he do it? As he left the office, he knew one thing for sure. This was no longer just about him. It was about something much bigger. The school buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread about the assembly and students packed the auditorium. Some came out of curiosity, others to support Keenan. Even teachers and staff members looked on with interest. Keenan sat in the front row, his hands clenched together. He wasn't afraid of public speaking, but this was different. This wasn't a classroom presentation. This was about something real, something personal. Dorothy sat a few seats away, her arms crossed, looking as defiant as ever. Keenan wondered if she regretted her words at all. Mr. Hendricks stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone. The chatter died down. Thank you all for being here, he said. As many of you know, a video of an incident that took place in our school has gained a lot of attention. This is a difficult topic, but ignoring it won't help anyone. He paused, letting his words settle. Racism, discrimination, and respect, these are things that matter, and today we're going to have an open conversation about them. Keenan swallowed hard as Mr. Hendricks turned toward him. Keenan, would you like to share your thoughts? A wave of nervous energy rushed through him as he stood and walked up to the stage. The microphone felt cold in his hands. He scanned the sea of faces in front of him. Some looked expectant, others skeptical. Keenan took a deep breath. I didn't expect this to turn into something so big, he began. I just responded to something that didn't sit right with me. He glanced at Dorothy, who looked away. But now that we're here, let's talk about it, Keenan continued. Because this isn't just about me. It's about something that's been happening for a long time. The crowd leaned in, waiting to hear what he would say next. This was his moment. Keenan took a steady breath, his heart pounding as he looked out at the sea of faces before him. The entire auditorium was silent, waiting to hear what he had to say. This isn't just about one comment, he began. It's about the way people see each other. The way some of us are treated differently just because of where we come from or what we look like. Murmurs rippled through the audience, but Keenan stayed focused. When Dorothy told me to go back to Africa, she probably thought it was just an insult, he continued. But those words have a history. They've been used for generations to make people like me feel like we don't belong, like we're not real Americans. But let me tell you something. I belong here just as much as anyone else. A few students clapped in agreement. Keenan felt a surge of confidence and went on. My ancestors built this country, he said firmly. Their blood, sweat, and tears are in this land. So when someone tells me to go back, they're ignoring the truth. Black people helped shape this nation. The claps grew louder, and Keenan could see more people nodding. Even some teachers looked impressed. He turned slightly to face Dorothy, who sat stiffly in her seat. I don't know why you said what you said, he told her. Maybe you were angry. Maybe you've heard those words before and never thought about what they really mean. But now you do. Dorothy's face turned red, but she said nothing. Keenan took a deep breath before delivering his final words. We all have a choice, to tear people down or lift them up. I choose to lift people up. What about you? The auditorium erupted into applause. This moment wasn't just about proving a point. It was about change. As the thunderous applause filled the auditorium, Keenan stood still, absorbing the moment. He had spoken his truth, and the reaction was far greater than he had expected. Students were on their feet, clapping and cheering. Even teachers, who usually remained neutral, nodded in approval. Dorothy shrank into her seat, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was pale, and she avoided making eye contact with anyone. The weight of Keenan's words had landed heavily on her, and for the first time she looked unsure of herself. Mr. Reynolds, the history teacher, stepped forward and raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "Keenan," he said, his voice filled with admiration, "that was one of the most powerful speeches I've ever heard from a student. You spoke with wisdom beyond your years." A few more students called out in support. "Yeah, Keenan, you told her! That was incredible! You're a legend, bro." But Keenan wasn't looking for praise. He turned back to Dorothy, his voice calm but firm. "I don't hate you, Dorothy, but I hope you understand why what you said was wrong. Words have power." For the first time, Dorothy finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost trembling. I didn't mean it like that," she muttered, but even she didn't sound convinced. Before Keenan could respond, Principal Harris took the microphone. "This is an important moment for all of us," she said. "Keenan's right. Words do have power, and in this school, we do not tolerate racism. Everyone belongs here." The crowd erupted again, and Dorothy looked like she wanted to disappear. Keenan took his seat, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about making real change. But was Dorothy really ready to change? As the noise in the auditorium settled, Dorothy sat frozen in her chair. Her fingers clutched the edges of her desk, and her eyes darted around as if searching for an escape. Keenan's words had landed like a thunderclap, exposing the weight of her ignorance in front of everyone. The principal continued, her voice firm. "We will not ignore what happened today. Racism has no place in this school or anywhere. Dorothy, you owe Keenan and everyone here an apology." A hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to Dorothy. Some students murmured to each other, waiting to see how she would react. She swallowed hard, her usual arrogance replaced by uncertainty. Keenan remained seated, his expression neutral. He wasn't looking for revenge. He just wanted her to understand. Dorothy opened her mouth, then closed it. She glanced at her friends, but even they avoided eye contact. The students who once laughed at her cruel jokes now distanced themselves. She was alone. Seconds passed like hours. Finally, she muttered, "I didn't mean." "Then why did you say it?" A voice from the crowd interrupted. It was Maya, one of Keenan's close friends. "If you didn't mean it, then why did it come out so easily?" Dorothy looked down at her lap. She had no answer. Principal Harris sighed. "Dorothy, this is your chance to take responsibility, not just for Keenan, but for yourself." The silence stretched on. Keenan didn't press her. He knew forcing an apology wouldn't make it real. Either she would own up to it, or she wouldn't. The question now was, would she choose to change? Dorothy remained silent, her face a mixture of frustration and shame. The weight of the moment was pressing down on her, and for the first time, she felt truly alone. The students she once considered friends were no longer standing by her. The authority figures she used to brush off were now looking at her with disappointment. Keenan took a deep breath and spoke, his voice steady. "You don't have to answer now, Dorothy. But one day, you're going to have to face what's inside you. Hate doesn't just disappear, it has to be unlearned." His words hung in the air, and Dorothy swallowed hard. She had never been called out like this before, never been challenged in a way that made her question herself. Principal Harris sighed. "Dorothy, I think it's best if you take some time to reflect. You will be attending sensitivity training, and I expect a formal apology, not just to Keenan, but to the entire student body." A ripple of murmurs spread through the auditorium. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about change. Dorothy's head jerked up. "You're forcing me to apologize?" "No," Principal Harris said firmly. "I'm giving you an opportunity to grow. What you do with it is up to you." Dorothy's lips pressed together. She looked around, seeing nothing but expectant faces. Some students still glared at her, others simply watched, waiting. She wasn't sure what she hated more, the fact that she had said what she did, or the fact that everyone had turned against her for it. Keenan stood up. "Come on, guys. We've got classes to get to." One by one, students started leaving the auditorium. Dorothy remained seated, gripping her desk, lost in thought. Would she fight back, or would she finally listen? As the auditorium emptied, Dorothy sat frozen in her seat. The room, once filled with voices, now echoed with an eerie silence. For the first time, she felt something she wasn't used to: doubt. She had spent years throwing around comments like the one she said to Keenan. She had laughed them off, excused them as just jokes, and ignored the discomfort they caused others. But this time, there was no laughter. No one was standing by her side. Principal Harris walked toward her desk and sat down across from her. "Dorothy, do you understand why this is serious?" Dorothy crossed her arms, still defensive. "I get it. I shouldn't have said it, but it's not like I meant anything by it." Harris sighed. "That's the problem. You think words don't carry weight, but Keenan and students like him have spent their entire lives hearing things like that, being told they don't belong. Do you have any idea what that does to someone?" Dorothy looked away. "It was just a moment. People will forget about it." Harris shook her head. "No, they won't, and more importantly, Keenan won't. You embarrassed him in front of everyone. You tried to make him feel small, and now the people around you are seeing you for who you are when you let hate control you." Dorothy's chest tightened. She had always thought she was untouchable, that she could say whatever she wanted without consequences. But now, her reputation was shattered. Harris stood up. "Take the rest of the day off. Go home and think about what kind of person you want to be." Dorothy clenched her fists, her mind spinning. Was this really happening? Was her world crumbling because of one sentence? For the first time, she wasn't sure of anything. Dorothy sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the ceiling. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her chest. She had spent years thinking she was untouchable, that her words were just words. But today, for the first time, she felt truly alone. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages and notifications. Some classmates called her out publicly, others distanced themselves from her, and a few tried to defend her, but their arguments were weak. The video of her confrontation with Keenan had spread like wildfire. Everyone had seen it. Dorothy hesitated before opening her social media. The comment section was brutal. This is 2025, and people like her still exist. Imagine being this ignorant in high school. Hope she learns from this. No excuses. Each message hit her harder than the last. She had been so sure of herself, so convinced that she could say whatever she wanted without facing consequences. But this time, there was no escaping reality. Her mother entered the room, arms crossed. "I just got off the phone with the principal," she said, her voice tight with disappointment. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Dorothy swallowed hard. It was just words. "I didn't think." "That's the problem, Dorothy. You didn't think," her mother snapped. "Do you even understand why people are upset?" Dorothy didn't respond. She wanted to defend herself, to push back, but deep down, a part of her knew Keenan's response, the crowd's reaction, Principal Harris's disappointment. It all meant something. For the first time in her life, Dorothy was forced to look in the mirror, and she didn't like what she saw. Dorothy barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, Keenan's words echoed in her mind, along with the looks of disappointment from her teachers, her classmates, and even her own mother. She had always believed that her views were just opinions, that words couldn't really hurt people. But now, faced with real consequences, she wasn't so sure. The next morning, she dreaded going to school. The halls, once familiar and safe, now felt hostile. Whispers followed her as she walked, and students who used to greet her looked away. Some outright glared. Her closest friends didn't even walk with her. It was as if overnight she had become someone people didn't want to be around. As she stepped into the principal's office, she saw Keenan sitting there with his parents. Principal Harris looked at her sternly. "Dorothy, do you understand why we're here?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure what to say. Keenan's mother spoke first. "What you said to my son wasn't just ignorant, Dorothy. It was hateful. And whether you meant it or not, it has consequences." Dorothy looked at Keenan, expecting to see anger, but instead, she saw something worse, disappointment. "I don't hate you," Keenan said finally. "I just want you to understand why it hurt." His calmness threw her off. She had expected rage or accusations, but instead, he wanted her to understand. Principal Harris folded his hands. "Dorothy, I believe in accountability. You will be given a suspension, and we are also requiring you to attend a diversity workshop." Dorothy felt her stomach drop. "A suspension?" "Yes," Principal Harris said firmly. "But more than that, I expect you to actually learn from this. Because if you don't, you'll find yourself isolated not just in school, but in life. For the first time, Dorothy felt the weight of her actions, not just on herself, but on others. And for the first time, she wanted to change. A week later, Dorothy sat quietly in the school's diversity workshop. She had dreaded this moment, expecting it to be a punishment. But as she listened to the stories of students from different backgrounds, something inside her shifted. The facilitator, a young black woman named Miss Thompson, shared her own experiences with racism. People often don't realize the weight of their words, she said, looking around the room. But words shape how we see each other. They can build bridges or tear them down. Dorothy swallowed hard. She had been tearing bridges down her whole life without even realizing it. When it was her turn to speak, she hesitated. "I used to think my words didn't matter," she admitted. "But after what happened with Keenan, I see now that they do." Keenan, who was also in the workshop, nodded slightly. He wasn't looking for revenge. He just wanted understanding. After the workshop, Dorothy approached him. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, "but I want to do better." Keenan studied her for a moment before offering a small smile. "That's all I ever wanted," he said. Over the next few weeks, Dorothy made real efforts to change. She spoke out when she heard racist jokes, started learning more about different cultures, and even apologized publicly at a school assembly. Her actions didn't erase what she had said, but they showed that people can change if they're willing to listen, learn, and grow. As for Keenan, he didn't forget what happened, but he saw something in Dorothy that made him hopeful, a willingness to be better. And that was a start. If this story moved you, don't let the message stop here. Share it with others and spark conversations about respect, understanding, and equality. Every voice matters in the fight against racism. Stand up, speak out, and be the change.